Okay, so we are doing night chapter 7 reading notes, and if you open it up, you will find that I've already given you the words, and I've already given you the like some of the text already in there for you. And then what I'm asking you to do is answer the things that are read. So in this case, a multi-syllable word I did not know was vigorous. How I broke it down, I already broke it down for you, vigor and us. You have to tell me what those two things mean, and then you have to tell me what you think the whole word means. Here, I've already given you the word grave diggers. I've given you the context it's in. Then 2 grave diggers took him, one by the head and one by the feet, and threw him out of the wagon like a sack of flour. You have to tell me what you think that means. Grave diggers in this case. Then there's figurative language. I already gave you the example. And then I'm asking you to answer, is it a simile, a metaphor, or an idiom? And then I want to know what you think that means. If you will notice, there is a black box on this one. I'm only asking 2 questions that require text and you to support your text. And I am expecting you to pull out those quotes because that's part of the goal. Does that make sense? So I've left it there. And then right here, I've given you a little hint about summarizing the tag. And then you're going to say, the title, the author, the genre, and then you're going to say is about blank. And you finish up the what the main idea is. And then I've given you a question to make an inference on. You just answer the question in this box, and then you're going to give me the clues from the text. Now, you don't have to quote this part, but you do have to tell me what was in the text that made you think this was the answer. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay. So all I'm going to do now is while you have this open, I am going to read for you. I'm going to do 2 pages today. And while you are working on the notes, I think you'll get, I don't know how many you'll get exactly, but I've already written down the page numbers, so you kind of already know when I'm on that page what to be looking for. Sorry, I know it's stressful when you see all the pages going by. Actually, very satisfying. Is it? We are almost done. There are only 9 chapters, and the 9th chapter is only 1 page long. So if we can finish chapter 7 this week and chapter 8 next week, we could be done by spring break and maybe watch a movie. So that's what I'm trying to get us to. Do you want me to make this bigger? Can I make it bigger? How do I make it bigger? Well, I just showed you. Press hide. Hide? Yeah, one up there. Where? Oh, here? Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. Good point. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading. And I need whoever's got that movie or the music on to turn it off and pay attention here. Matt! We're reading the book, and you need to pay attention to me and not the movie and the stuff, okay? Okay, well, but I can hear that you're not listening to me. Pressed up against the others in an effort to keep out the cold, head empty and heavy at the same time, brain a whirlpool of decaying memories, indifference deadened the spirit. Here or elsewhere, what difference did it make? To die today or tomorrow or later? The night was long and never ending. When at last a gray glimmer of light appeared on the horizon, it revealed a tangle of human shapes, heads sunk upon shoulders, crouched, piled on top of the other, like a field of dust-covered tombstones in the first light of the dawn. I tried to distinguish those who were still alive from those who had gone, but there was no difference. My gaze was held for a long time by one who lay with his eyes open, staring into the void. His livid face was covered with a layer of frost and snow. Okay, so I see one right here. We have one that we saw. It said, when at last a gray glimmer of light appeared on the horizon. So that's the beginning of the sun, right? It revealed a tangle of human shapes. So everybody inside that car are all tangled. They're on a train, right? They're all tangled, arms and legs and that kind of stuff. Heads sunk upon shoulders, crouched, piled on top of the other, like a field of dust-covered tombstones in the first light of the dawn. Now, are they really a field of dust-covered tombstones? No, they're bodies. So, this is an example of figurative language. It's using the word like, and it's comparing these bodies to dust-covered tombstones. Okay, it's comparing the bodies to dust-covered tombstones, and it's using the word like. So you have to decide, is it a simile, a metaphor, or an idiom based on the word like? So write that down. And then you need to explain, what do you think he means comparing these bodies to a field of dust-covered tombstones in the first light of the dawn? What is a tombstone?
It's where,
Huh?
it's like a body that can rest in place.
A tombstone is a stone, and it's placed in front of a grave, and it's usually engraved with the person's name and the date that they were born and the date that they died, and sometimes a little message. So he's comparing the bodies to tombstones, which are kind of like grave markers, right? So you figure out what you think he means by that. We're moving on. My gaze was held for a long time by one who lay with his eyes open, staring into the void. His livid means usually angry, face was covered with a layer of frost and snow. My father was huddled near me, wrapped in his blanket, his shoulders covered with snow, and he was dead too. Oh, was he dead too? I called him. No answer. So do you think his dad is going to be dead?
Yes.
I would have cried out if I could have done so. He did not move. My mind was invaded suddenly by this realization. There was no more reason to live, no more reason to struggle. The train stopped in the middle of a deserted field. The suddenness of the halt woke some of those who were asleep. You ever been driving in a car, you've fallen asleep, and then all of a sudden it stops? And what does that do to you? Yeah, you kind of push back, and that kind of wakes you up, right? So that's what he's describing. The suddenness of the halt woke some of those who were asleep. They straightened themselves up, throwing startled looks around them. Outside, the SS, now who are the SS? The Nazis, good, went by shouting, "Throw out all the dead, all corpses outside." So they know that people are dying in there, right? And so what they have to do now is throw out these dead bodies so that they're not traveling with more bodies, right? The living rejoiced. There would be more room. Volunteers set to work. They felt those who were still crouching. Here's one. Take him. They undressed him, the survivors avidly sharing out his clothes. So they strip him down, and they're giving everybody the dead guy's clothes. Okay? Then two grave diggers, now this is one of your questions, then two grave diggers took him, one by the head, one by the feet, and threw him out of the wagon like a sack of flour. From all directions came cries. "Come on, here's one. This man next to me, he doesn't move." I woke from my apathy just at the moment when two men came up to my father. I threw myself on top of his body. He was cold. I slapped him. I rubbed my hands, crying, "Father, Father, wake up. They're trying to throw you out of the carriage." His body remained inert. The two gravediggers seized me by the collar. "Leave him. You can see perfectly well that he's dead." "No," I cried. "He isn't dead. Not yet." I set to work to slap him as hard as I could. After a moment, my father's eyelids moved slightly over his glazed eyes. He was breathing weakly. "Miss Stricker, there's somebody at the door." I slapped him. I rubbed his hands, crying, "Father, Father, wake up. They're trying to throw you out of the carriage." His body remained inert. The two gravediggers seized me by the collar. "Leave him. You can see perfectly well that he's dead." "No," I cried. "He isn't dead. Not yet." I set to work to slap him as hard as I could. After a moment, my father's eyelids moved slightly over his glazed eyes. He was breathing weakly. "You see?" I cried. The two men moved away. 20 bodies were thrown out of our wagon, and then the train resumed its journey, leaving behind it a few hundred naked, dead, deprived of burial in the snow of the field in Poland. We were given no food. We lived on snow. It took the place of bread. The days were like nights, and the nights left the dregs of their darkness in our souls. Do y'all know what dregs are? Okay, when you drink coffee, sometimes some of the grounds get down in there. Does that make sense? And they're kind of at the end of the coffee. Those are dregs. The backwash, sometimes from a drink, are kind of like the dregs. It's the gross stuff that's left at the end of a drink. Does that make sense? So it's not is that a good connotation or a bad connotation? Bad, yeah. You don't want the dregs, right? So what he's saying here is 20 bodies were thrown out of our wagon, and the train resumed its journey, leaving behind it 100 naked dead, deprived of the burial, in the deep snow of a field in Poland. We were given no food, lived on snow, no bread. Let me see where it says. The days were like nights, so everything felt dark and depressing, right? And the night left the dregs of their darkness in our souls. So the night was so bad that even the worst part of something that you drink or is left inside your soul. Now we know that that's figurative language, right? It didn't really happen, but that's what he's comparing it to. He's comparing that feeling as something to show that it was very negative, right? And that it left a little depression in every single person's soul that was in there. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. The train was traveling slowly, often stopping for several hours and then setting off again. It never ceased snowing. And now remember, they've got open boxes, so whatever's happening weather-wise is happening on top of them, right? It's not like they're closed in anymore. And now here it is winter. So that was bad. All through these days and nights, we stayed crouching, one on top of the other, never speaking a word. We were no more than frozen bodies, our eyes closed. We waited merely for the next stop so that we could unload our dead. 10 days, 10 nights of traveling. How long did they travel? 10 days and nights. And we know that because it's right here in the text. Sometimes we would pass through German townships, very early in the morning usually. The workmen were going to work. They stopped and stared after us, but otherwise showed no surprise. So did the Germans know what was in the train?
No.
Yeah, they did. Oh. But they didn't show any surprise because they've seen enough of it. Does that make sense? Yeah. One day when we had stopped, a workman took a piece of bread out of his bag and threw it into a wagon. There was a stampede. Dozens of starving men fought each other to the death for a few crumbs. The German workmen took a lively interest in this spectacle. I want you to think about this. Have any of you been to the beach?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever seen the seagulls? And if you leave even a little bit of something out, like, you're eating lunch or whatever, and you have just like maybe the crust on a bread or something like that, if you throw it out, what happens?
They steal it and they go to seagulls.
And how many seagulls are there? Yeah, tons. Have you ever gone to, we used to do this at Locomotion all the time. Did y'all ever go to Locomotion when you were a kid? Mm-hmm. Growing up? And when you throw, they have that seed, or not seed, but like the fish food you can buy. It's like a quarter and you get a big old handful of it and you spread it out there. And what happens to the fish? They all go nuts, and a ton of them come around trying to get to it, right? And they'll fight each other for it. And this is exactly what he's explaining happened. These German workmen threw some bread in there, and everybody was fighting each other for it because they're starving, right? So he's trying to demonstrate how people were turned into almost like animals, right? Because of the devastation that they felt, and the lack of any kind of, living, opportunities to live a normal human life. They were treated like animals, and they started to act a little bit that way, right? Some years later, I watched the same kind of scene at Aden. I don't know where this is. The passengers on our boat were amusing themselves by throwing coins to the natives, okay, who were digging in to get them. An attractive, aristocratic Parisian, that's somebody from Paris, probably a girl, was deriving special pleasure from the game. I suddenly noticed that 2 children were engaged in a death struggle, trying to strangle each other. I turned to the lady. Please, I begged, don't throw any more money in. Why not? She said. I like to give charity. But is she really giving to charity, or is she just watching people turn into animals? Yeah, it's not a good thing. It's like people that can't wait for a fight, to watch a fight in the cafeteria. That makes me sick.
Those are bad.
In the wagon where the bread had fallen, a real battle had broken out. Men threw themselves on top of each other, stamping on each other, tearing at each other, biting each other. Wild beasts of prey with animal hatred in their eyes. An extraordinary vitality had seized them, sharpening their teeth and nails. A crowd of workmen and curious spectators had collected along the train. They had probably never seen a train with such a cargo. Soon, nearly everywhere, pieces of bread were being dropped into the wagons. The audience stared at these skeletons of men. Why does he call them skeletons of men? Yeah, they're starving to death. It's just bone and skin, right? Fighting one another to the death for a mouthful of bread. A piece fell into our wagon. I decided that I would not move. Anyway, I knew that I would never have the strength to fight with a dozen savage men. Not far away, I noticed an old man dragging himself along on all fours. He was trying to disengage himself from the struggle. He held one hand to his heart. I thought at first he'd received a blow in the chest, and then I understood. He had a bit of bread under his shirt. With remarkable speed, he drew it out and put it in his mouth. His eyes gleamed. A smile, like a grimace, lit up his dead face and was immediately extinguished. A shadow had just loomed up near him. The shadow threw itself upon him. Is it really a shadow who's doing that? No, it's another man, right? Fell to the ground, stunned with blows, the old man cried, Mayor, my boy, don't you recognize me? I'm your father. You're hurting me. You're killing your father. I've got some bread for you too. So who was the shadow who was hunting him for a simple piece of bread? His son. Is that not awful? He collapsed. His fist was still clenched around a small piece. He tried to carry it to his mouth, but the other one threw himself upon him and snatched it. The old man again whispered something, let out a rattle, and died amid the general indifference. His son searched him, took the bread, and began to devour it. He was not able to get very far because 2 men had seen and hurled themselves upon him. Others joined in, and when they withdrew, next to me were 2 corpses. Side by side, the father and the son. I was 15 years old. So for a little piece of bread, the son took over his father, right? And then when other people saw him with the bread, they hurled themselves on top of him and fought him, right? And so now you have 2 dead guys laying next to Eliezer, and now we realize, how old was he? 15. In our wagon, there was a friend of my father's called Mayor Katz. He had worked as a gardener at Buna and used to bring us a few green vegetables occasionally. Being less undernourished than the rest of us, he had stood up to imprisonment better, because he was relatively more vigorous. He had been put in charge of the wagon. So this was our word, vigorous. Vigor means strength. Okay? And OUS means full. I'm giving you the answers. You should be typing. Vigor means strength. Us means full. Okay? Vigor means strength. OUS, the suffix right here, means full. Does that make sense? So let's look at your reading notes. You should have box number 1 done. You should have just finished vigor, which means strength, and us, that means full. And then you need to tell me what you think it means. We've already seen the figurative language. It revealed a tangle of human shapes, heads sunk upon shoulders, crouched, piled up on top of the other, one on top of the other, like a field of dust-covered tombstones in, oh, and look, I even misspelled the, imagine that, the first light of the dawn. So what do you think that is? Is it a simile, a metaphor, an idiom? We talked about that. And then what do you think it means? You have to decide what you think it means. We have not answered the 2 questions in the middle yet. You are not ready to do the summarizing yet. But here's an inference. What does the incident with the bread thrown into the cattle car reveal about the physical and mental state of the prisoners? And I talked about that. Right, they're fighting over bread, but what does that tell you about their mental state? Where are they? And then you've got to give me some clues. Not word for word. You can do it word for word, but you don't have to do it word for word. Clues from the text. That means from this page, right? That tell you about that. That's where I'm going to stop today. I'm going to give you a few more minutes to work on the, the boxes that you can do, and then you'll do Lexia.